Sir Keir Starmer has doubled down on his plans for GB Energy, the state-owned electricity company that's taken centre stage in the party's general election campaign. He senses he's onto something. There is, however, a flaw in the proposal because in reality GB Energy is a dangerous mess that might well leave Britain even more exposed to global energy markets that remain as volatile as ever, say some commentators. Joining us to debate this, climate columnist Donnachadh McCarthy and the author of Not Zero, Ross Clark. Good afternoon to you both. Thanks for joining us. Let's have a little listen, firstly, though, to that debate last night when a question was raised about the climate. Here it is.
The world is facing a climate catastrophe now. Both of you have broken promises on the environment. What are you doing to put climate at the very centre of your policies?
And of course, we're going to tackle climate change and get to net zero. This election is about how we do it. And I don't think that British people should solve a global problem all by themselves, which is why I'm also prioritising our country's energy security and your bills. We've heard a lot about the cost of living challenges today. So I have made some decisions, bold decisions, that will mean that we can save all of you thousands of pounds, still meet our targets, and we can ensure our country's energy security.
This is really important. A transition is coming that's very important when it comes, for example, to energy, a transition to renewables. I don't think we should just see that as a challenge. It's a huge opportunity because if we go to renewable energy, that means cheaper bills. Renewables are cheaper, not just for the short term, but for the long term.
Cheaper bills. I mean, I think that's the headline that most people will be interested in. Ross Clark, cheaper bills, what's not to like?
Well, that's Labour's fantasy. And I mean, I find it extraordinary that the Conservatives haven't challenged this more. But Labour is claiming that it will decarbonise the electricity grid by 2030 and in the process save consumers £300 a year. That's a huge downgrade. Actually, a few weeks ago, it was claiming that it was going to save us £1,400 a year. Well, it's sort of downgraded, but it's still a fantasy, I'm afraid. That £300 a year figure comes from really a comparison between the long-term contract prices for wind and solar energy compared with those sort of very high gas prices we had after the Ukraine invasion. And but I mean, since that that figure was generated by a think tank called Ember last year, well, the price of gas has come down, and along with it, the Ofgem price cap. The cost of building wind farms and solar farms has gone up. So, you know, already that figure is completely out of date and a complete fantasy.
Donnachadh, I can hear you itching to get in on that point. I mean, firstly, it's cheaper bills. What? But when? By 2030?
Well, it will take time, obviously, but I would argue there's two concrete proposals that will straight away help lower bills. One is lifting the insane ban on onshore winds that Ross has campaigned for so long successfully. That needs to go. It's the cheapest form of energy globally. The idea the Tories banned it. We're the only nation on earth, Ian, that banned onshore wind. And the second thing that Labour is proposing to, which I think is good, is that actually it's proposing to restore some of the major slashing to the budget caused by the campaign by Ross's newspapers to the insulation programme that left millions of people exposed to global markets over the last 2 years as prices skyrocketed after Ukraine invasion. Your introduction point is crucial. Leaving Britain exposed to internal markets, global markets, you do two things. You rip up the insulation program, which Ross and the Tory parties did, and you refuse to invest in renewables, which again Ross and the Tory parties slashed. So therefore, what I would argue, what the Tories have done is increased our bills. What Ross has advocated has increased the bills for millions of people across this country. And what we should be doing is what Labour is doing on those two issues. However, there is a point where both the Tory party and the Labour Party's policies will increase bills. Their obsession with nuclear will increase bills because actually it is the most expensive energy on the planet and is utterly insane. And their second focus on the fusion is mad. It's been gone for 70 years, pouring millions of pounds into fusion, which hasn't delivered a single kilowatt, is nuts.
OK, Ross, a lot to pick apart there. I mean, just broadly on the point of onshore wind, if it's cheaper and it's healthier and it works, what's not to like?
Well, I mean, we have, of course, been investing huge amounts in renewable energy, wind and solar over the past few years in this country, and we found a very good home for wind farms, which is offshore in the shallow seas around Britain, where they're not really bothering anyone. I don't mind offshore wind farms, and when you've got a crowded country like Britain, there are very, very few places where you can put these things where they're not irritating people, they're not blighting homes and causing problems along those lines. But let's just drill down into this cost thing first. I mean, all this sort of £300 a year, that's all sort of conjecture, which depends on future movements in oil prices and the cost of building wind farms and so on. But let's look at a hard example of a country which really has invested in wind, which is Denmark. 57% of electricity in Denmark is now generated by wind. That's twice as much as in Britain. And do you know what? Denmark has the highest domestic energy prices in the world. That is where wind gets you. It's no use
Why is that? Because you might think, is that because they're still paying for the infrastructure? What's the reason?
If you're going to have a grid that's based on intermittent renewables, it's no good just looking at the price of generating the electricity. You've also got to look at the cost of the backup, the storage, what you do when wind and solar energy simply isn't available. And what we do at the moment is we turn gas stations up and down. But that's a pretty inefficient way to use gas, because we're paying for a lot of gas plants to stand idle for a lot of time, and the more wind and solar we put into the system, the bigger that problem becomes.
Donnachadh, I mean, if there is an example, Denmark, not too far away from us, paying more, but supposedly the bastion of all things renewable.
Yeah, Denmark invested early, and obviously they have a historic leftover from their initial investments. Britain is a latecomer, but we are in every single auction over the last 5 years. Wind has come in as one of the cheapest form of energy, significantly cheaper than gas or oil. And the key question here is, well, we have to take action. Ross rubbishes almost every single action we can take on climate. The action is the global scientists have said we're in a crisis. The feedback from global temperatures this summer are absolutely terrifying scientists. So we need to act. So we need to do three things, Ian. We need to act fast. We need to do it economically, and we need to do it fairly. We must ensure this the price and for investment in a green carbon-free Britain doesn't fall on the poor. And
what is that you said act fast, Donnachadh? I mean, what's the
yes.
What's going to happen if we wait a few years? Which I think was Sunak's point, wasn't it? That actually, we're fine with that. If we can find better ways and more efficient ways, fantastic. If we can pop a windmill up, that's great. But I'm not going to put people's livelihoods and raise their taxes in order to make it happen. What's the sense of urgency here?
Well, if you delay action, you will have millions of people remaining with high bills because their homes haven't been insulated. If you delay action, you will not have the renewable energy to cope with the next crisis in the fossil fuel industry, and you will retain Britain's dependency on global energy markets. The fact is, no matter how much we drill in the North Sea, the oil industry remains part of international markets. If we build our own renewables, they're British, and they're British jobs, and it insulates Britain from future insulation hikes. And it's a win.
Okay, is that, do you sense, Ross, a good point that if we produce our own, then regardless, that's got to be a plus, right? We own it. We're not reliant on the Russians as the obvious example.
Well, if we were producing our own gas, which of course Labour wants to stop new licences for oil gas extraction in the North Sea, we would be less reliant on overseas gas. We would be able to produce our own. But I mean, it simply is not true that wind energy and solar enery will work out cheaper for UK consumers. You can look at the cost of generating the stuff. But as I explained earlier, you cannot just look at the cost of generating wind and solar energy. You've got to look at the cost of the backup, the cost of the storage, the cost of operating a grid, which is made up of a large amount of renewables. But if I can also deal with this insulation point, yes, of course it makes sense to have better insulated homes. And when we build new houses, we should absolutely demand the highest insulation standards. But what Labour is planning to do, and what the Tories have done in the past, is just chuck a load of public money willy-nilly at these retrofitted insulation schemes. It's very difficult to do. The cowboys rush in. And, you know, what we got in South Wales now is hundreds of homes having to have the cavity wall insulation extracted because it's caused damp problems. And I see if you have this just, you know, thoughtless chuck money at the problem as Labour's trying to do, that's the kind of problem we end up with.
There are 3 million homes in Britain that actually there are around 6 million homes in Britain that don't have insulation in their proper insulation on their roofs. It would cost just £3 billion to do that. That is an easy win-win, reduce people's cost and will actually reduce Britain's dependency on gas.
All right, Donnachadh, Ross, thank you guys. We stop there. We could go on, of course, and we will revisit this debate at some point. This is all reference Keir Starmer's great GB Energy company. I reckon this is a classic case of a party coming up with what sounds like a great idea. You know, the Great British Energy Company. I mean, well, what's not to like? Well, we're going to produce our own energy. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be cleaner. Well, who doesn't like that? Anything that is that simple, I'm pretty sure there are a collection of spanners already in the works. And this idea that I'm going to see a big drop in my energy bills as a result of this, I think is something that we might be many, 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 many years away from.